The thing about Elaine Beaumont was that she could make anyone look like God had taken a second pass at them. That was how her mentor had described her talent when Elaine was 19. Fresh off a plane from Port-au-Prince with 2 oversized duffel bags, a Haitian mother's prayers stitched into the lining of her coat, and a portfolio that made senior makeup artists at the agency go quiet in a way that meant something. Not the polite quiet, the threatened quiet. This girl is going to take all of our clients quiet. By 22, she had. By 26, she was in Milan. By 29, Seoul had claimed her entirely, and she had let it because Seoul was the only city that matched her energy. It moved fast and looked good doing it. It ate well, dressed better, and never, ever slept before midnight. Elaine Beaumont understood that city like she'd been born speaking the language which she now, in fact, spoke. Fluently, with a Haitian-American accent that made every Korean person she met tilt their head and grin despite themselves. She was 32 now, and she was the best. Not best as in one of the top. Best as in, when Laneige launched their anniversary campaign, they called Elaine first and waited 3 weeks for her schedule to open. When a third-generation Chable daughter was getting married and wanted her makeup to trend on every platform for 48 consecutive hours, her people called Elaine's people and offered numbers that would make a lesser woman faint. When a new K-beauty brand wanted their debut campaign to slap so hard the beauty community was still talking about it 6 months later, they flew Elaine business class, put her in a suite at the Joseon Palace, and did everything short of rolling out a red carpet at Incheon Airport. She had rolled into this particular Tuesday morning in a way that made 3 junior stylists on set stop what they were doing and watch. Her outfit alone was a conversation. Wide-shouldered ivory satin jacket. Structured like architecture, soft like water. Over a silk slip dress the color of rich espresso, fitted through the waist and grazing her ankles. Heels that were tall enough to mean business and comfortable enough that she'd chosen them herself. Her locks were pinned up at the back with 2 gold pins shaped like crescent moons, with a few loose ones framing her face the way she liked. Intentional, never messy. Her skin was deep and luminous, and her makeup was what the industry called a moment. The most precise cut crease in burnt copper anyone on that set had ever seen in person. Lips in a rich berry stain that made her whole face sing. She looked like the cover of something important. She walked like she knew it. Uni! Her assistant Jaiwon came flying across the set with a tablet and a very stressed expression. The brand director changed the brief again. They want the second look warmer. They're saying the original palette reads too editorial for the campaign direction. Elaine didn't break her stride. She took the tablet, scanned the updated brief in roughly 4 seconds, handed it back, and kept walking toward her station. Tell them warmer is fine, but I'm keeping the underliner because that's what's going to make this campaign stop thumbs. If they pull the underliner, the whole look becomes forgettable, and in 6 months they'll be asking why the campaign didn't perform. She settled into her chair, opened her kit with the practiced calm of a surgeon. And Jaiwon, get me a coffee, please. The good one from downstairs, not whatever that machine produces. Jaiwon was already typing with one hand and dialing with the other. Already ordered. Uni. Brand director is on hold. Tell him I'll talk after the first look is done. She uncapped a brush and smiled to herself. He'll agree. They always agree. The shoot wrapped by early evening, and it had gone beautifully, which everyone on set knew meant Elaine had simply done what Elaine did. The model had cried. At the end because she'd looked at herself in the mirror and felt, for the first time in a long time, like exactly who she was supposed to be. Elaine had handed her a tissue, careful not to let her ruin the last look before they got the final frames, and said, "You were already her, baby. I just helped you see it." That was the thing about Elaine that her clients talked about more than the technique, more than the products, more than the results. She made people feel seen. She was packing her kit when it happened. The studio was a high-end creative space in Hanamdong, and because it was that kind of building in that kind of neighborhood, the clientele that moved through its lobby was reliably interesting. Elaine had shared elevator banks with idols, executives, and at least 2 people she was fairly certain were undercover celebrities doing their best impression of normal people. But she had never shared a lobby with a woman like this. She was in her early 60s, but carried herself with the straight-spined assurance of a woman who had decided decades ago that age was simply information and had moved on from it entirely. Her clothing was immaculate. A dove gray wool set with a silk blouse beneath it. Simple jewelry that cost more than everything in hair that had gone silver white and was styled into something elegant and deliberate. She had the kind of face that had clearly been beautiful when she was young and had simply matured into something more interesting. Fine lines that read as character, eyes that were sharp and warm in equal measure, and a mouth that looked like it smiled often and laughed easily. She was standing near the lobby's flower arrangement, an enormous thing in a celadone vase, and she was looking directly at Elaine. Not staring, not rude, just looking the way someone looks when they've noticed something that interests them. Elaine, who had an artist's habit of cataloging faces, looked back. The woman smiled first. It was such a warm smile, unexpected in its openness, that Elaine found herself smiling back before she'd made the decision to. The woman walked over. Her heels were quiet on the marble. "Your makeup," she said, in Korean, gesturing toward her own face to indicate she meant Elaine's. "It's extraordinary. Did you do it yourself?" Elaine answered in Korean, which produced the predictable delight, the small widening of eyes, the pleased surprise. "I did. Thank you. What products?" "The liner especially. I've never seen that precision outside of a professional setting." "That's because I am a professional." Elaine offered her hand. "Elaine Beaumont, makeup artist." The woman's eyes lit in a way that went slightly beyond polite interest. She took Elaine's hand with both of hers, which in Korean culture was warmth offered deliberately. "Seo Yeonhee. And this," she gestured toward the general space between them, "is fate being efficient." Elaine blinked. "I'm sorry. I've been looking for someone for a project." Seo Yeonhee's smile stayed perfectly pleasant. "But we can talk about that another time. First, are you married?" Elaine laughed before she could stop herself. "That's quite a pivot. I find it's more efficient to establish the important things early." The woman's eyes were dancing. "Well, no," Elaine said, still smiling despite her confusion. "I'm not married." Seo Yeonhee nodded as if Elaine had confirmed something she'd already suspected. She reached into her bag, small, structured, almost certainly custom, and produced a card that she pressed into Elaine's hand with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to people accepting things from her. "For the project," she said. Then she smiled again, that warm, slightly too knowing smile. "And for other things. It was very nice to meet you, Elaine Beaumont." She walked away before Elaine could respond, her heels still quiet, her posture still impeccable. Elaine looked down at the card. Seo Yeonhee, Director, Seo Cultural Foundation. And below the foundation name in smaller print, Seo Group. Elaine knew the name. Everyone in Seoul with any awareness of money knew the name. Seo Group wasn't just a company, it was a dynasty. Real estate, private equity, hospitality, and, if the quieter conversations at industry events were to be believed, other interests that weren't listed in any annual report. Old money, new power, and a family whose name appeared in newspapers only when they chose it to. She flipped the card over. On the back, in elegant handwriting, "You remind me of someone my son needs to meet." Elaine stared at it. Then she laughed, genuinely, from the chest, and dropped it into her bag next to her favorite setting spray. A Korean billionaire's mother was trying to set her up. Only in Seoul. She told her best friend Priya about it over dinner that night at their favorite spot. A small, ferociously good Japanese-Korean fusion place in Itaewon where the owner knew their order and the corner booth was spiritually reserved for them on Tuesdays. Priya, who was Indian-British, worked in PR, had opinions about everything, and was the only person on earth who could outtalk Elaine on a good day, reacted with the level of enthusiasm the story deserved. "She just handed you a card that said you need to meet her son?" Priya's chopsticks hovered forgotten over her bowl. "On the back? Handwritten? Handwritten. Lovely penmanship too. I noticed." "Elaine, I know. This is a Korean drama. You have walked into a Korean drama." "I haven't walked into anything. I took a card." Elaine refilled her own glass with a comfortable pour. "I'm not calling her." "You're absolutely calling her." "I am not being set up by someone's mother, Priya. I'm 32. I'm a millionaire. I run my own." "She's from the Seo Group." "I know. Elaine, the Seo Group. I understand the significance." Priya leaned forward. "Their son, Seo Jihan. Have you ever seen a photo of him?" "Because I have seen a photo of him, and I say this as someone who is happily engaged." The man is built like an architectural decision. Elaine pointed her chopsticks in Priya's direction. You're not helping. I'm not trying to help. I'm trying to make you call the woman. Elaine looked out at the street, at Seoul moving through its Tuesday evening with its characteristic beautiful chaos. Lights in motion and the low hum of a city that was always doing something. She thought about the woman in the lobby, the warmth in her handshake, the mischief in her eyes. You remind me of someone my son needs to meet. She picked up her wine. I'm not calling her, she said, but she didn't throw the card away. The call came to Elaine. She had kept the card for 6 days, which she told herself was not the behavior of someone who was going to call. It was, in fact, the behavior of someone who kept a card in the small interior pocket of her work bag and moved it, without thinking, to the interior pocket of her next work bag, which was a choice she declined to examine too closely. On the 7th day, her phone rang with an unknown number, and the voice on the other end was warm, accented, and immediately recognizable. Elaine SSI. It's Seo Yeonhee. I hope this isn't a bad time. Elaine was in the back of a car on her way to a brand consultation in Gangnam and had been staring out the window thinking about absolutely nothing related to a business card. How did you get my number? Ah, a small, cheerful pause. I know people who know things. This is Seoul, darling. Information is a courtesy between the right people. Now I'm calling about the foundation project. We're mounting an arts exhibition in the spring and we need a makeup artist who understands both beauty and visual storytelling. Your name came up from 3 separate sources. It was a legitimate project. A real brief, professionally presented and actually interesting. The CO Cultural Foundation was mounting a multimedia exhibition that would include live performance elements, and they wanted a makeup artist who could consult on the visual aesthetic cohesion across all live components. It was the kind of creative work Elaine genuinely loved. Bigger than a campaign, more collaborative than a solo shoot. She was interested before she could decide not to be. Send me the full brief, she said. Already sent. Check your email. Another small pause and then, brightly, as if it had just occurred to her. I was thinking we could meet to discuss it in person. I know a beautiful place for lunch. My son will be there. He has input on the exhibition's direction since it was partly his concept. There it is. Mrs. Seo. Yeonhee, please. Yeonhee. Elaine kept her voice pleasant and even. I'm interested in the project. I'm not interested in being set up. Of course not, Seo Yeonhee said, with the tone of someone who had heard this precise objection many times and found it charming every time. It's simply lunch. About the exhibition. My son will just happen to be there because he's involved in the work. He has excellent taste. In art. The exhibition. You are not subtle. I am extremely subtle. Subtle is my signature quality. Ask anyone. Despite herself, Elaine smiled. I'll read the brief and let you know about the meeting. Wonderful. Oh, and Elaine SSI, wear whatever you want. You always look wonderful. But if you happen to wear something that shows off that gorgeous neck of yours, well, a sound that was almost a laugh, very dignified, very controlled. It would be good for the lighting in the restaurant. She hung up before Elaine could respond. Elaine looked at her phone for a moment. Then she put it down, looked out the window at Seoul and said, to no one, she's insane. But she was smiling. The brief was legitimately excellent. Elaine spent an evening with it, cross-referencing the Foundation's past projects online, and found herself increasingly drawn in. The exhibition was called Resonance, a multimedia exploration of beauty, memory, and identity across Korean and diasporic artistic traditions. There would be film, sculpture, live performance, and a photography series. The visual language across all live components needed to be cohesive without being uniform, culturally resonant without being costumey, modern without losing the emotional weight of the historical references. It was, frankly, a beautiful project. She replied to the brief with 3 questions that would tell her whether the team actually knew what they were doing. Seo Yeonhee answered all 3 personally within 20 minutes, with a precision that confirmed she was not simply a socialite with a foundation. She was someone who understood the work. Elaine accepted the lunch. The restaurant was in Cheongdam, small and private in the way that only very expensive places could afford to be. The kind of place where the tables were spaced for real conversation and the staff had mastered the art of appearing only when needed. Elaine arrived 4 minutes early, which was her habit, wearing a silk blouse in deep burgundy. Fitted at the shoulders, open at the collar, tucked into wide tailored trousers in cream with a subtle texture. Gold jewelry minimal, her locks down today, falling past her collarbone, adorned with two thin gold rings threaded through near the front. Her makeup was quieter than usual. A glossy, deep plum lip, skin that glowed, lashes that required no commentary. She looked, as Jaiwan had breathed when she'd passed her in the hall that morning, otherworldly. Seo Yeonhee was already at the table, and she stood when Elaine entered with the natural grace of a woman who simply rose for people she was genuinely pleased to see. She was in a rich mauve today, silk blouse under a structured jacket, and she looked at Elaine's entrance with the open satisfaction of someone whose plan was proceeding exactly as intended. "You're early," she said warmly, as they did the customary greeting. "I'm always early," Elaine replied. "4 minutes. My son is—" a small glance toward the entrance. "Also always early. 3 minutes, usually. So he should be." The door opened. Elaine, who was lowering herself into her chair, looked up, and that was the moment the day changed. Seo Jihan was 35. He was tall in the way that read across a room, not imposing, but present, the kind of height that came with proportion and was therefore simply attractive rather than startling. He was in a dark charcoal suit that had clearly been made for him specifically, no tie, the collar of his shirt open in a way that felt deliberate and easy at once. His face was, and Elaine Beaumont, who looked at faces for a living, understood this fully, structurally extraordinary. Strong jaw, clean line of a nose, and eyes that were, as he scanned the restaurant and found their table, both warm and direct in a way that she hadn't expected. He saw his mother first, and something in his expression softened, visibly, genuinely. He loved her, obviously, the way you could always tell. Then he saw Elaine, and he stopped. Not dramatically, not in a movie way, just a half-second pause in his stride, the way someone pauses when they've registered something their brain needs a moment to process. His expression didn't perform anything, simply shifted, focused. Elaine, who had not survived 32 years and a decade in the beauty industry by being unaware of when someone found her beautiful, recognized the look immediately. She decided, on the spot, to be completely unbothered by it. "Jihan-ah," his mother said, with the gentle pride of someone unveiling something they'd worked very hard on. "This is Elaine Beaumont, the makeup artist I told you about." He crossed to the table. Up close, his eyes were dark brown and very steady. He offered a slight bow, then his hand, and his handshake was firm, brief, respectful. "Elaine SSI, I've seen your work. The Laneage Anniversary Campaign, the second look especially." She hadn't expected him to know that specifically. She tilted her head slightly. "Most people cite the first look. The second look is better. The restraint is what makes it land." He said it simply as a fact and sat down. Elaine looked at Seo Yeonhee. Seo Yeonhee was looking at her water glass with an expression of absolute serene innocence. She coached him, Elaine thought. That woman absolutely coached him. But the thing was, the way he'd said it hadn't felt coached. It had felt like someone who'd actually looked and actually thought and said what he meant. She picked up her menu. This, she thought, was going to be a very interesting lunch. The thing about Seo Jihan was that the reputation was completely, almost comically, wrong. Elaine had done what any reasonable person would do after a lunch that had lasted 3 hours without her noticing. She had gone home, poured herself something cold, and searched his name. The search results had returned. Photographs, more than she'd expected, fewer than she'd feared, several business profiles, 2 or 3 articles about the Seo Group's philanthropic expansion, and then social commentary, forum posts, the internet's collective verdict on Seo Jihan, arrived at by people who had never, based on the available evidence, actually met him. Playboy came up often. She could see how the story had started. He was wealthy, visually outstanding, and photographed occasionally at events with beautiful women who were not the same beautiful woman. He kept his private life genuinely private, which in Seoul's particular social ecosystem read as suspicious. He was unmarried at 35. He was, by the accounts of people who thought this was relevant information, too smooth, too composed, too good with words. This, apparently, was evidence of insincerity. Elaine, who knew exactly how unfairly composed people were read by the world, found the whole thing quietly irritating. She closed the tabs and called Priya. "He's not a playboy," she said without preamble. Priya made a sound that indicated she had been waiting for this call. "You met him." "His mother ambushed me at lunch." "Of course she did." And Elaine stretched out on her sofa, staring at her ceiling, which was high and white and unhelpfully neutral. He knew the Laneage campaign. Specifically, he had actually looked at it. Interesting. He asked real questions about the exhibition brief. Not performative questions, actual questions about methodology. And when his mother tried to steer the conversation toward whether I preferred mountains or the ocean as a romantic destination, Elaine could still hear Yonhee's casual pivot, as smooth as silk. He looked like he wanted to disappear into the table. Priya laughed. He was embarrassed. Deeply. It was almost sympathetic. A pause. Almost. "Are you going to work on the exhibition?" "Yes. The project is genuinely interesting and I want to do it." "And Jihan?" Elaine was quiet for a moment. Outside her window, Seoul glittered. "He asked for my direct number before we left. For exhibition correspondence." She looked at her ceiling. "He then texted me at 9:15 p.m. about a reference document." 9:15 p.m. about a reference document. It was a very thorough reference document. Elaine Beaumont. "He's just..." She stopped. "He looks at you like you're the whole thought. Not like you're part of a sentence or a step in a process. Just the whole thought." She paused. "I don't like it." "You love it." "I don't love it. Your voice is doing the thing." "My voice isn't doing anything." "Elaine, your voice is absolutely doing the thing." She saw him 8 more times in the next 3 weeks, every one of which was entirely professional and completely legitimate, and also somehow managed to produce a moment she ended up thinking about later. The first meeting at the Foundation's offices, a beautiful space in Jongno, all clean lines and natural light. She had presented her initial vision for the live performance components, and he had listened the way rare people listened, without waiting for his turn to speak. When she finished, he'd said, "The part about the layering of textures, can you say more about that?" And she'd spoken for another 12 minutes without planning to, because he'd asked exactly the right question. The second meeting, he'd brought coffee without asking. Her order, specifically. When she'd looked at it and then at him, he'd said, simply, "Jaiwan told me." I asked. The third meeting, she'd arrived to find a gallery space that had been rearranged. Materials moved, lighting shifted. In exactly the configuration she'd mentioned offhandedly in passing 2 meetings ago, that she thought would work better for the visual flow. He'd done it himself, apparently. She had stood in the rearranged space, looked at him and said, "Did you?" "It's better this way," he said, in the simple tone that she was learning was just how he talked. "You were right." She had turned back to the space so he couldn't see her expression do something she hadn't given it permission to do. His mother, naturally, was managing the whole situation with the subtlety of a weather system. Yonhee would appear at meetings, Foundation director, completely legitimate, and spend half her time finding reasons to point out Jihan's qualities, as if she were a one-woman PR team. Jihan designed the layout of this floor, she mentioned in passing, during a site visit. Jihan speaks 4 languages. Did you know? 4. Some people stop at 2. A small pause. Not that one language isn't beautiful, of course. He cooked for us last weekend. From scratch. Not from a packet, from actual ingredients. Isn't that interesting? Jihan, when his mother did this, would develop a very focused interest in whatever document or object was nearest to him. Once, with nowhere obvious to look, he'd simply looked directly at Elaine. A brief, helpless glance, equal parts mortified and resigned, and she'd had to look away quickly because she'd nearly laughed. One afternoon, when Jihan had stepped out to take a call, Yonhee slid into the seat across from Elaine with the decisive grace of someone who had been waiting for this exact opportunity. "You like him," she said as a statement. Elaine looked up from her reference sheets. "I think the exhibition brief is very strong." "I didn't ask about the brief." "I know." Elaine set down her pen. "Yonhee SSI, I appreciate what you're doing." "I do. He seems like a genuinely good person, and clearly you love him." She paused. "But people like me don't." She searched for the right word. "Assume. I don't assume that what looks like interest is interest. I've learned not to." Yonhee was quiet for a moment, her sharp eyes steady. "Do you know," she said finally carefully, "that he told me after the lunch that he hadn't thought about the meal while he was eating any of the food?" A small smile. "He was eating and thinking about the conversation and forgot to taste the food. My son, who is, I promise you, someone who normally has strong opinions about food." She folded her hands. "He's not performing, Elaine. That's not who he is. I know who my son is." Elaine looked at her for a long moment. The door opened and Jihan came back in, phone tucked away, attention already moving to the table and settling, as it reliably did, on Elaine. "Sorry," he said. "Logistics." He glanced between them. "What did I miss?" "Nothing," they both said at the same time. He looked between them with the expression of a man who knew exactly what he had missed and was choosing not to press it. The turn came on a Thursday evening, late, when the rest of the foundation team had gone home and Elaine had stayed to finalize a color palette presentation she wanted to get right. She hadn't expected anyone else to still be in the building. She heard his footsteps before she saw him. She'd learned his particular cadence, and looked up from her spread of color swatches as he appeared in the doorway of the workspace. He'd taken his jacket off at some point, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and he looked less edited than usual. Not undone, just real. Like the version of himself that existed when he wasn't performing composure. "You're still here," he said. "So are you." He came into the room, looked at the spread across the table. The swatches, her notes, the small photographs she'd pinned up as reference, and was quiet for a moment, looking at it. "This is beautiful," he said quietly. "It's not done. I know. It's still beautiful." He looked at her. "Can I?" She gestured at the chair across from her. He sat, and for a while they just worked in the same space, her organizing, him reviewing some document on his tablet, and it was one of those silences that is so comfortable it becomes a kind of honesty. "The Playboy thing," she said eventually, not looking up from her swatches. "A beat. Ah, I looked you up. I know. Most people do." His voice was even, but there was something careful in it. "Does it bother you? I'm curious." She did look up now. "Where does it come from?" He considered this with the seriousness she'd come to expect from him. "I don't explain myself to people who've already made up their minds," he said. "Which means I never explain myself." Which, apparently, confirms what they've already decided. Elaine looked at him. "That sounds lonely." Something in his face, a very small thing, shifted. "It is," he said. Simply. Honestly. She looked at him for another moment, then back at her swatches. "For what it's worth," she said, arranging a deep terracotta next to a warm gold. "I don't make my mind up from what other people say." The silence after that was different. Warmer. "Elaine SSI," he said. "Elaine," she corrected, without looking up. "Just Elaine." She could hear. She couldn't see, but she could hear that he was smiling. "Elaine," he said. And the way he said her name made it sound like he'd been waiting to say it like that for a while. She kept her eyes on the swatches. But she was smiling too. She let him take her to dinner on a Sunday. Not a meeting. Not a working lunch. A dinner, asked for plainly, arranged properly, with none of his mother's orchestration. He had texted her himself, simply, "Can I take you to dinner?" Not for the exhibition. Just for dinner. She had held her phone for approximately 45 seconds. Then yes, but I'm choosing the restaurant. He had replied, of course. She chose a place she loved. Not the most impressive restaurant in Seoul, not the kind of place designed to signal anything, but a small, perfect Korean-Japanese spot in Mapo that she'd been going to for 2 years, where the food was honest and the atmosphere was warm and she felt like herself. She wore a strapless deep plum dress, fitted from shoulder to mid-thigh, clean and confident, with a light drape coat in caramel thrown over it. Her locks pinned up at the crown with gold pins, small gold drops at her ears. She looked like exactly what she was. A woman who knew her own taste and was comfortable in it. He was waiting outside. He was always exactly on time. She had figured out by now that this was not an affectation. It was just who he was. Seo Jihan treated other people's time like it mattered, because he believed it did. He looked at her. That same half-second focus she'd seen in the restaurant 3 weeks ago, and said, with genuine simplicity, "You look incredible." No performance. No strategy. Just a true sentence. Thank you, she said. They went in. Over the course of 3 hours, Elaine learned the following things about Seo Jihan that she had not previously known. That he had a minor but genuine obsession with tteokbokki that his family found undignified given their position, and that he had very thoughtful opinions about which establishments were doing it right, which was charming. That he had wanted to study architecture at university and had done business instead, because the weight of the family had needed him to, and that he did not say this with bitterness, just with the clean honesty of someone who had made peace with a compromise without pretending it hadn't cost something. That he had read her public interviews, there were 3 from trade publications, and that he remembered specific things she'd said, not in a way that felt like research, but in a way that felt like he genuinely found them interesting. That when he laughed fully at something she said, his head tilting back briefly, it changed his whole face into something that was almost impossible not to look at. That he was watching her the same way. Walking back through Mapo after dinner, the city doing its soul thing around them, lights and motion and that particular urban hum, he had reached over and taken her hand. Not as a move, not as a statement, just quietly, naturally, with the assurance of someone who'd decided something and was done second-guessing it. She looked at their hands. Then she looked at him. He was already looking at her. I'm not, she started. I know, he said. I'm not easy, she said. I'm not. I don't move fast and I don't trust easily and I have. Elaine. His voice was quiet and steady. I know. I'm not asking you to be anything different. Pause. I'm just holding your hand. She looked at him for a long moment in the Seoul streetlight, this man who listened like it was a practice, who rearranged furniture because she'd been right, who got embarrassed when his mother turned him into a product feature, who had said it is to lonely without flinching. Okay, she said, and kept walking with her hand in his. His mother found out through methods that Elaine chose not to investigate and was on the phone within 24 hours. I heard you had dinner. We did. And Elaine, who was in her studio touching up kit inventory and smiling at her shelves, said, and it was dinner, Yeonhee. But good dinner. Yes. The sound on the other end of the line could only be described as triumphant. Not loud, not dramatic, just deeply personally satisfied. The sound of a woman whose plan had worked and who had known it would work and had simply been waiting for the world to catch up. I'm not saying anything, Yeonhee said. You don't need to. I'm just a small sound, the most dignified version of a squeal that money and elegance could produce. Very pleased, for completely neutral reasons. As his mother, who has no agenda. He's very good, at loving people, when someone lets him. Her voice went quieter, genuine beneath the performance. He just needed someone who'd let him. Elaine set down her brush. I know, she said softly. 3 months later, the exhibition opened. Resonance filled the CO Foundation's gallery space with something that everyone who attended described differently. Moving and electric and like being remembered by something that didn't know you. But what they all agreed on was that it was extraordinary. The live performance components were exactly what Elaine had envisioned. Faces that told stories, makeup that moved between tradition and modernity, the way the exhibition itself did, visual cohesion that felt organic rather than imposed. Her work was threaded through the whole thing like a signature, present everywhere, obvious nowhere. Standing at the reception, watching people move through the space with that particular reverence people reserve for art that actually reaches them, she felt the particular satisfaction of work that had become what it was supposed to be. She felt him beside her before she saw him. Jihan, in a dark suit that had clearly come from a very good Italian, stood next to her and looked out at the room. Their shoulders were touching. He was holding 2 glasses, and he offered one without looking at her. She took it. They stood like that for a moment, watching their work exist in the world. It's good, he said. It's good, she agreed. He turned to look at her. That look, the whole thought look, the one that still did something to her pulse even now, 3 months in, which she had stopped pretending it didn't. Thank you, he said. She turned to look at him. For what? For letting it be real. He wasn't talking about the exhibition. Or he was, but not only. She looked at him for a moment, this careful, quiet, unfairly handsome man who had texted her at 9:15 p.m. about a reference document as a reason to be in contact, who had rearranged a room because she'd been right, whose mother had identified something before either of them were willing to admit it. She leaned up and kissed his cheek, slow and deliberate, and said quietly against his skin, "Thank you for being worth letting it be." He turned his head slightly and caught her mouth with his brief and warm and certain, the kind of kiss that isn't trying to say anything because everything has already been said. Somewhere across the room, Seo Yeonhee, who had been watching from the side of the space with a glass of champagne and the contentment of a woman whose plan had concluded exactly as planned, made the dignified, elegant, very pleased sound again. Her daughter-in-law, she had decided, had the most beautiful skin she'd ever seen. She raised her glass to nobody in particular, and Seoul, outside the gallery windows, glittered on.
Happy Easter, besties. In this story, we learned that the right love doesn't perform, it shows up, pays attention, and rearranges the room because you are right. Alain's story is a reminder that being accomplished, independent, and self-sufficient doesn't mean closing the door on love. It means waiting for someone who respects the door, and sometimes the universe sends that person's mothers first. Thank you so much for watching. Kindly like, subscribe, and share.